Hey guys. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into a tale as vibrant and complex as the color it produced, the story of how the ancient Phoenicians, those intrepid seafarers and traders, managed to extract a truly legendary purple dye from, wait for it, thousands upon thousands of humble sea snails. Imagine, for a moment, an empire built on a single, astonishing color. A hue so coveted it became synonymous with royalty, power, and unimaginable wealth. You're about to discover the secret behind the most expensive pigment of the ancient world. A secret that involved vast, stinking piles of tiny mollusks and a process that was, frankly, a bit gross and immensely laborious. You might think your biggest challenge tonight is staying awake. But trust me, after hearing about the sheer scale of snail slaughter and the putrid stench that enveloped ancient dye works, you might just find yourself having vivid purple-tinged nightmares. Probably won't survive this journey without a newfound, slightly horrified respect for ancient fashionistas and industrial entrepreneurs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see how far these bedtime history trips reach, connecting us across time and space. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. A journey into the heart of ancient industry and luxury. Our story begins not with kings or battles, but with a humble mollusk, the murex snail. These seemingly insignificant creatures is found clinging to rocks in the shallow coastal waters of the Mediterranean, held within them the biological key to a color that would define empires for millennia. Think about it, a color so rare, so difficult to produce that only the wealthiest and most powerful could afford to wear or display it. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a brazen declaration of status, a visual shout to the ancient world that you were, indeed, a very big deal, perhaps even touched by the divine. The Phoenicians, masters of the sea, and shrewd merchants beyond compare, didn't just stumble. Upon this secret, they perfected it. While there's evidence of earlier civilizations using similar dyes, it was the Phoenicians, particularly those from the cities of Tyre and Sidon, who elevated Tyrian Purple production to an industrial art form, establishing a monopoly that lasted for centuries. They weren't just dyeing fabric. They were quite literally crafting an identity, a brand for themselves and for the elites of the ancient world. You see, long before Instagram influencers dictated trends and fast fashion churned out millions of garments daily, color itself was an incredible luxury, a sign of painstaking effort and extraordinary resources. Most common folk wore undyed fabrics, or perhaps simple drab earth tones derived from easily accessible plants. But Tyrian Purple, or Royal Purple as it was often called, was different. Its distinctive hue, a deep, rich reddish purple, was incredibly stable. It didn't fade easily. In fact, some ancient accounts suggest it grew more vibrant with age and exposure to sunlight and even washing. It's almost like a fine wine improving with time. Imagine owning a garment that literally improved. With wear becoming more precious the longer you possessed it, it's the ancient world's equivalent of a self-cleaning, perpetually upgrading, status symbol wardrobe. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians truly discovered this dye from scratch or simply refined a process known to earlier, less documented civilizations that perhaps used it on a smaller, less commercial scale. What's undeniably true, however, is their unparalleled mastery of its large-scale production and, crucially, its distribution across the entire ancient world. They transformed a fascinating biological curiosity into an industrial marvel, establishing sprawling dye works along their coasts, particularly around the islands of Tyre, that would process literal mountains of these small, shell-encased treasures. This wasn't some quaint cottage industry operating out of a backyard shed. It was an industrial-scale operation, pungent and demanding, requiring immense logistical coordination, yet incredibly lucrative. You can almost smell the ancient world from here, can't you? The complex mix of sea salt, the rich aroma of cedar, wood from their ships, and, well, an overwhelming, persistent reek of decaying snails. It was the smell of money, baby. The exact origins of the discovery are shrouded in myth and time, but one popular legend attributes it to Heracles and his dog. The story goes that Heracles was walking along the coast with his dog, who, upon biting into a murex snail, emerged with its mouth stained a brilliant purple. Heracles, being a resourceful sort, supposedly recognized the potential of this miraculous color. While charming, this is almost certainly a myth, but it speaks to the awe and wonder that such a vibrant, permanent color would have inspired in a world dominated by earthy tones. The reality was likely a long process of experimentation, trial and error, perhaps observing the natural staining that occurred when these snails were crushed, leading to the gradual refinement of the complex dyeing procedure. It required meticulous observation and a keen understanding of natural processes, a true testament to ancient ingenuity. The economic implications were staggering. A single pound of Tyrian purple wool in the Roman era could cost more than a pound of gold, making it the most valuable commodity by weight that wasn't a precious metal or gem. This exorbitant cost wasn't just due to its beauty or permanence. It was a direct reflection of the incredible resources and labor required to produce it. We're talking about collecting hundreds of thousands of snails for just a tiny amount of dye. Imagine trying to hit those production targets today. Sorry, boss. The snail quotas are down this quarter. It's mind-boggling to consider the sheer effort involved in maintaining such an industry for centuries. The Phoenicians didn't just sail and trade. They innovated, they industrialized, and they cornered a luxury market that few could ever hope to penetrate. Their cities became centers of immense wealth, not just from the purple dye itself, but from the trade networks it helped establish and solidify. The demand for purple spurred the development of advanced navigation and shipbuilding, allowing the Phoenicians to sail further and establish colonies across the Mediterranean, all in service of their thriving commercial empire. This little snail, then, was arguably one of the most powerful creatures in the ancient world. So even if it didn't know it, Murex Snail's secrets, now that we've met our protagonists, the humble yet powerful Murex Snails, let's zoom in on the real stars of our show, the Murex Snails themselves. You might be picturing some giant, monstrous mollusk, but in reality, these were fairly unassuming creatures, typically ranging from a few centimeters to perhaps 10 to 15 centimeters in length, depending on the specific species. The two primary species exploited by the Phoenicians were Hexoplex trunculus, now often referred to as Balenus brandaris, and Murex brandaris, now Hostilum brandaris, though other Murex species also contain the precursor compounds for the dye. These aren't your garden snails, mind you. These are marine snails, typically found in shallow coastal waters, often on rocky substrates where they feed on other shellfish and marine detritus. They're part of a larger family of predatory sea snails, characterized by their robust, often spiky shells. Now, here's the quirky tidbit. The actual dye isn't found in the snail's blood or its flesh, but in a tiny, almost insignificant hypobranchial gland located near the snail's respiratory organs, close to its shell opening. This gland produces a colorless, viscous fluid, a sort of pre-dye, which when exposed to air and sunlight undergoes a chemical reaction, transforming into the brilliant purple we know. It's a bit like how an avocado turns brown when exposed to air, but, way more profitable. This pre-dye is actually a mixture of various brominated indigo and indirubin compounds. The precise hue of the final dye, whether it was a vibrant red-purple, a deep violet, or a more subtle amethyst, depended on the specific species of murex used, the mixture of species, and crucially, the exact processing methods employed by the Phoenician dyers. This variability in color is something historians still debate. Was there a single Tyrian purple, or was it a spectrum of highly valued purples? Evidence suggests the latter, with different shades perhaps indicating different levels of prestige or origin. Imagine, if you will, the early days of this discovery. Someone, somewhere, likely crushed a murex snail, perhaps by accident, and noticed the indelible stain it left. Maybe it was on a fishing net, or a rock, or, as the myth suggests, on a dog's snout. The key was realizing that this seemingly innocuous fluid, once exposed to the elements, underwent a magical transformation. But going from a single accidental stain to an industrial process that required millions of snails, that's where the Phoenician genius really shines. This wasn't just about collecting a few snails. It was about systematically harvesting them on an unprecedented scale. They had to understand the snails' habitats, their breeding cycles, and the best times to collect them to maximize their yield. It was a sophisticated, environmentally aware, large-scale fishery long before modern aquaculture, except, with more crushing. The sheer volume of snails required was staggering. To produce just a single gram of pure dye, it's estimated that you needed tens of thousands of snails. Think about that. A single toga or cloak, perhaps weighing a few pounds, would have required hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of individual mollusks. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a mass extinction event on a local scale, day after day, year after year. Archaeological sites of Phoenician dye works, particularly those found near ancient Tyre and Sidon, are characterized by enormous mounds of crushed murex shells, sometimes meters deep and covering acres. These shell middens are like ancient industrial waste dumps, serving as grim monuments to the scale of the operation and the sheer number of lives sacrificed for the sake of luxury. If you were an ancient snail living anywhere near the Phoenician coast, you had a rough life expectancy. Oh, is that a boat? Well, it was nice knowing you, Gary. The Phoenicians weren't just skilled in dyeing. They were adept at resource management, albeit a brutal form of it. They would collect the snails, often by hand from shallow waters, or using traps and nets in deeper areas. The best time for collection was apparently when the snails were actively breeding, as this was when their glands were largest and contained the most dye precursor. This meant understanding the marine ecosystem in an intimate way, knowing when and where to find the densest populations. It was a testament to their practical scientific knowledge, even if it wasn't codified in textbooks. They knew their prey, and they knew how to exploit it efficiently. This knowledge, combined with their extensive maritime network, allowed them to transport snails, or the raw glandular material from distant coasts, back to their central processing facilities, ensuring a continuous supply for their demanding industry. And it wasn't just about quantity, quality mattered. Different species of murex produce slightly different shades. For example, Hexoplex trunculus typically yielded a more violet or blue purple, while Murex brandoris tended towards a reddish purple or scarlet. By carefully combining the secretions from different species, or by varying the processing steps, the Phoenicians could achieve a range of hues, from almost black purple to bright crimson purple, each with its own specific value and appeal. Suggests a level of sophistication and control that goes beyond simple extraction. It implies a deep understanding of the chemistry involved, even if they couldn't articulate it in modern scientific terms. They were essentially ancient chemists, masters of pigmentation, operating without the benefit of beakers, Bunsen burners, or safety goggles, though given the smell. Safety goggles might have been the least of their concerns. The value of the dye also meant that the process itself was highly secretive, guarded. You didn't just share the recipe for something worth its weight in gold. The Phoenicians maintained a virtual monopoly on Tyrian Purple production for centuries, a testament not just to their technical skill, but to their commercial acumen and strategic control over trade routes. This control contributed significantly to their immense wealth and influence in the ancient world, allowing them to establish prosperous colonies and trading posts from the Levant all the way to the Atlantic coast of Africa. So next time you see a snail, remember, some of its ancestors might have inadvertently helped build an empire. Just try not to get any ideas. Harvesting the deep having met our protagonists, the humble yet powerful. Murex snail sluts talk about the harvesting process itself. You're probably picturing a pleasant day at the beach, wading into crystal clear waters, gently plucking snails from sun-warmed rocks. Well, you'd be half right about the wading, but subtract the pleasantries and add a whole lot of backbreaking. Often dangerous labor, this wasn't a leisurely seaside stroll. This was an industrial-scale operation demanding immense manpower and logistical coordination, extending far beyond the immediate coastlines of Tyre and Sidon. The initial phase involved collecting the snails. The Phoenicians primarily focused on the shallow coastal waters, often no more than a few meters deep, where murex snails are most abundant, clinging to rocks, seaweed, and even the hulls of ships. Divers, often simple fishermen, would wade into these waters or use small boats to reach slightly deeper beds. They'd scoop up the snails by hand, or perhaps with simple scoops or rakes, depositing them into large wicker baskets or nets. Imagine doing this for hours, day in and day out. Under the scorching Mediterranean sun, your hands raw from the shells, and your body constantly battling the currents and slippery rocks. It was certainly not a job for the faint of heart, or those prone to sea sick. However, the demand for purple dye was so immense that local snail populations would quickly become depleted. This forced the Phoenicians to expand their hunting grounds, pushing their reach further out into the Mediterranean. They developed more sophisticated techniques for deeper water harvesting, utilizing dredges or large nets lowered from their ships. These nets would scrape the seabed, bringing up vast quantities of snails, along with other marine life that would be discarded. This expansion highlights their incredible maritime capabilities. They weren't just traders, they were expert navigators and fishermen, systematically exploiting marine resources across a vast geographical area. Historians still argue about the precise geographical extent of their murex harvesting operations. Did they have dedicated snail fleets, sailing hundreds of miles? Or did they rely more on coastal communities along their trade routes to supply raw material? Evidence suggests a combination, with major industrial centers processing snails from both local and more distant sources. Once collected, snails needed to be transported, often alive, back to the processing facilities. This meant keeping them in conditions that would minimize spoilage, as the precious glandular fluid would degrade quickly. They might have been held in holding pens in tidal pools or transported in specialized containers on ships. You can only imagine the smell of thousands of live snails crammed together, slowly beginning to putrefy as they waited for their destiny. And that's before the real processing even began. This journey from the natural habitat to the dye works was crucial, as the quality and quantity of the dye were highly dependent on the freshness of the snail material. The next, and perhaps most infamous step, was the extraction of the gland. This was not a gentle process. The snails were first crushed, either whole or by carefully breaking open their shells to expose the small hypobranchial gland. For smaller snails, it was often easier to simply crush the entire shell. For larger ones, the gland could be surgically removed using a small tool, a more meticulous but potentially more efficient method, as it avoided contamination from the shell fragments. This part of the process would have been incredibly labor-intensive and, frankly, rather messy. Imagine thousands of people, day in and day out, cracking shells, squishing snails, and extracting tiny glands. It's the kind of repetitive, slightly gross work that would make you question all your life choices. Is this really what I went to ancient vocational school for? To be a snail crusher? The actual crushing was often done in large stone vats or pits where workers would use heavy stones or wooden mallets to break open the shells. This created enormous quantities of shell fragments, which, as we mentioned, form the massive shell middens found at Phoenician dye sites. These middens are not just archaeological curiosities. They are direct evidence of the sheer scale of the Phoenician purple industry. A testament to the fact that they really did sacrifice entire populations of these mollusks for their coveted color. It's estimated that to dye a single Roman senator's toga, which wasn't even pure purple, would have required the sacrifice of tens of thousands of snails. A full imperial purple robe would demand hundreds of thousands, if not millions. This makes the modern concept of fast fashion seem incredibly wasteful, but at least we're not annihilating mollusks on an industrial scale for every t-shirt yet. The extracted glands, or the crushed snail mass, were then collected into large terracotta vats. This raw material, despite containing the precious precursor, would have been highly putrid. The initial fluid is colorless, but as soon as it's exposed to air and sunlight, it begins to oxidize, changing color. However, the first stage of the transformation involves decomposition. So, you had hundreds of vats filled with decomposing snail parts, fermenting under the hot Mediterranean sun. The smell emanating from these dye works must have been absolutely horrendous, capable of offending noses miles away. Ancient texts occasionally mention the terrible stench associated with these factories, describing them as highly unpleasant places to be near. It's no wonder they were often located on the outskirts of cities or on islands, downwind from residential areas. The faint odor of success, apparently, was also the pungent odor of decay. The working conditions for the laborers in these dye works would have been incredibly harsh. Imagine toiling all day in the heat, surrounded by the stench, handling raw and decomposing organic material with little to no protective gear. It was a testament to the economic power of the industry that enough labor could be found and sustained for centuries. This highlights a universal truth about luxury goods throughout history. Their creation often rests on the backs of those performing difficult, unpleasant, and low-status work. So, while emperors proudly paraded in their purple finery, the true cost was paid not just by the murex snails, but by the anonymous men and women who endured the stench and toil of the dye works. It's a vivid reminder that behind every dazzling historical artifact often lies a story of immense human effort and sometimes environmental impact. From gland to gold, with the murex snails harvested and their precious glands extracted, we now move to the truly alchemical part of the process, transforming that unassuming putrid fluid into the legendary Tyrian Purple. This wasn't a simple dip-and-dry operation. It was a carefully controlled chemical reaction, perfected over centuries by the Phoenician dyers, who were arguably the ancient world's most successful industrial chemists. The first step, as we touched upon, was collecting the hypobranchial gland fluid, or the crushed snail flesh, into large, open terracotta vats. These vats were typically made of robust clay, designed to withstand the heat and the chemical reactions that would soon take place. They varied in size, but some archaeological finds suggest vats large enough to hold several hundred liters. These were not kept pristine. They were working vessels, likely caked with residue from previous batches, contributing to the overall the aroma of the facility. Now here's where the magic and the stink really began. The collected material was then left to macerate or ferment. This involved letting the crushed snails or their glands sit in the vats, sometimes with a small amount of water or brine, for several days. This fermentation process was absolutely crucial, as it allowed enzymes within the snail material to break down complex organic compounds, releasing the colorless precursor molecules that would eventually become the purple dye. Think of it as a very, very slow, very stinky ancient science experiment. During this stage, the vats would be covered to prevent excessive evaporation and to allow the anaerobic decomposition to occur. This fermentation produced a truly noxious smell, a mix of rotting seafood, ammonia, and sulfurous gases. It was so potent that ancient writers sometimes referred to the dye works as factories of stench. You definitely want to avoid a guided tour on an empty stomach. Someone told you their ancient job involved stirring stinky snail soup. You'd probably just nod and back away slowly. After several days of this delightful fermentation, the mixture would begin to change. It would transition from a yellowish, opaque liquid to a greenish hue, then to a bluish tint, and finally, upon exposure to air and sunlight, it would begin to turn into the familiar red-purple. This color progression is a key indicator of the chemical reactions taking place. The precursor molecules, primarily indigoid pigments like indican, were initially water-soluble and colorless. During fermentation, they were reduced to a leucoformosoluble, yellowish-green compound that could easily penetrate textile fibers. This reduction process was essential for the dye to bind effectively to the fabric. To facilitate this crucial chemical transformation, the dyers would often add specific substances to the vats. The precise recipes were closely guarded trade secrets. But it's believed they might have used sea salt to control osmosis and prevent rapid bacterial decay, or possibly even urine. Yes, human urine. It's an ammoniacal source to aid in the reduction. Process. Urine, particularly stale urine, contains ammonia, which acts as a reducing agent, converting the dye precursor into its soluble leuco form. So, not only were these places stinky with rotting snails, but they might also have smelled vaguely of a public restroom. Just another charming detail of ancient industry, right? Historians still debate the exact cocktail of additives used. Some theories suggest the use of wood ash lye, or even naturally occurring minerals, to adjust the pH and optimize the chemical reactions. The specific composition would have varied by workshop and region, leading to subtle variations in the final dye. Once the reduced leuco dye was ready, the actual dyeing process could begin. This was a carefully controlled operation. Skeins of wool, linen, or silk, the most common textiles for luxury garments, would be carefully immersed into the vats containing the yellowish-green, soluble dye liquor. The fabric, once saturated, would absorb the colorless leuco dye. It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? You're dipping your precious fabric into what looks like muddy water, just hoping for purple. But here's the clever bit. After being thoroughly soaked, the fabric was slowly removed from the vat and exposed to the air and sunlight. This exposure was the final critical step. The oxygen in the air reacted with the leuco dye absorbed by the fibers. An oxidation process occurred. The colorless leuco dye molecules would gradually transform into their insoluble, intensely colored form, the vibrant Tyrian purple pigment binding permanently to the fabric. You would literally watch the fabric change color before your eyes, from a pale yellow-green to a rich, deep purple. It must have seemed like pure magic to anyone witnessing it for the first time, a true marvel of ancient technology. This photooxidation process is similar to how modern indigo dyes work, demonstrating a surprisingly advanced understanding of chemical principles by the Phoenicians. The intensity and specific shade of the purple could be controlled by varying the number of dips and the duration of exposure. Multiple dips would lead to a deeper, richer purple, sometimes so dark it appeared almost black in certain lights, but with a magnificent purple sheen when viewed closely. This deep, almost black purple was considered the most prestigious and valuable shade. It's often reserved for emperors and high-ranking officials. It took meticulous skill and experienced dyers to achieve these precise shades consistently. Another testament to the Phoenicians' mastery. The entire process, from snail collection to finished textile, could take several weeks, highlighting the immense investment of time, labor, and resources in producing this luxury good. No wonder it was so expensive. It really makes you appreciate just how much effort went into making ancient fashion statements. The alchemists. Brew, having delved into the pungent alchemy of the dye vats, let's now truly appreciate the alchemists. Brew and the meticulous transformation from foul-smelling liquid to a vibrant, enduring color. The process wasn't just a series of steps. It was a complex interplay of chemistry, patience, and a surprising degree of environmental control for an ancient industry. Imagine the Phoenician dyers, not just as laborers, but as skilled artisans. And proto-scientists, it's constantly refining their techniques through generations of trial and error. We left off with the fermented snail liquor, like a yellowish-green putrid concoction bubbling under the Mediterranean sun. This isn't just stagnant water. It's a living soup, teeming with bacteria and enzymes that are performing crucial work, breaking down the complex precursors in the snail glands. The precise duration of this fermentation phase was critical and would have varied depending on ambient temperatures, the concentration of the snail material, and perhaps even the moon phase, if ancient superstitions played a role, which they often did. Too short and the dye wouldn't properly develop. Too long and it might putrefy past the point of usefulness. This required a keen sense of observation and experience, passed down through apprenticeship rather than written manuals. It's almost like brewing beer, but instead of a refreshing pint, you get a really expensive cloak. The key to the whole operation, as mentioned, lay in the leuco form of the dye. This colorless, soluble state allowed the dye molecules to penetrate deep into the fibers of the wool, linen, or silk. If the dye were introduced in its insoluble, colored form, it would simply coat the surface of the fabric, leading to a much less vibrant, less durable, and easily faded result. This understanding of solubility and oxidation was a major technological leap for the ancient world. It showed an intuitive grasp of molecular interactions, even if they didn't have microscopes or chemical formulas. They just knew what worked. Through painstaking experimentation and observation, the oxidation step, the grand reveal, was arguably the most visually striking part of the entire process. Once the fabric, soaked with the yellowish-green leuco dye, was lifted from the vat, it was slowly exposed to the air. The oxygen molecules in the air would then react with the leuco dye, causing it to transform and become insoluble. You can picture it, a pale, sickly yellow piece of wool slowly, magically blooming into a magnificent purple right before your eyes. This transformation was often described as occurring in stages, a pale green, then blue, then a reddish tint, finally settling into the deep, rich purple. It was a spectacle that must have deeply impressed onlookers and reinforced the mystical aura surrounding this precious color. This unique property of Tyrian purple, its ability to develop color only upon exposure to air, is a fringe tidbit that often surprises people who assume all dyes work by simply imparting a pre-existing color. The control over the final shade was a highly guarded trade secret and a testament to the dyer's skill. To achieve a very dark, almost black purple, which was the most valuable shade, the fabric would undergo multiple dips and oxidation cycles. Each dip added more dye molecules to the fibers, and each exposure to air deepened the hue. This iterative process was time-consuming and labor-intensive, further contributing to the dye's exorbitant cost. Imagine the precision required. Long in the sun, and the color might darken excessively. Too little, and it wouldn't achieve the desired richness. It was a delicate balance between chemical reaction and artistic judgment. This level of precise control over a natural process is a mainstream historical fact, demonstrating the sophistication of ancient industries. Interestingly, the specific hue also depended on the type of fiber being dyed. Wool tended to absorb the dye most effectively, resulting in the richest, most vibrant purples. Linen, with its smoother, less porous fibers, was harder to dye effectively with Tyrian purple, though still possible. Silk, introduced later to the Mediterranean, also took the dye beautifully, leading to incredibly luxurious and lightweight garments. The interaction between the dye molecules and the specific proteins or cellulose in different fibers played a role in the final color and its permanence. This subtle variation means that what we call Tyrian purple wasn't a single, monolithic color but a spectrum of luxurious purples. Historians still argue about the precise chemical formulas and conditions that produced the full range of shades documented in ancient texts. Was it purely a matter of different snail species, or did subtle variations in the additives, temperature, or exposure time play a more significant role? The waste products of this process were also significant. Beyond the enormous shell middens, the liquid residue from the vats would have been intensely polluted and malodorous. This effluent, rich in organic matter and chemical byproducts, would have been discharged into the sea, potentially causing localized environmental damage, though likely less widespread than modern industrial pollution. The sheer scale of ancient industrial processes often goes unappreciated, and the environmental footprint, while not comparable to today, was certainly measurable in the immediate vicinity of these massive production sites. The Phoenicians were not just producers. They were also masters of quality control. It's highly probable they had methods, perhaps simple visual comparisons or light tests, to ensure consistency in the dye batches and to verify that the finished textiles met the exacting standards of their wealthy clientele. Single imperfect batch could ruin a substantial investment in snails and labor. Their reputation for quality, alongside their monopoly on the source, was key to their enduring commercial success. You wouldn't want to show up to the emperor's gala in a nearly purple toga, would you? That would be a social faux pas of epic proportions. So, what began as the humble secretions of a sea snail, through a series of ingenious, if pungent, chemical transformations, emerged as one of the most coveted substances in the ancient world. It's a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance, finding extraordinary value in the most unexpected places. And it highlights how deeply intertwined ancient industry was with natural processes, requiring a profound intuitive understanding of the environment and its hidden potentials. Purple's prestige with the shimmering, vibrant purple textile finally. In hand, we now arrive at the core of Tyrian Purple's mystique, its prestige and symbolism. This wasn't just a pretty color, it was a powerful statement, a visual shorthand for wealth, status, and authority throughout the ancient world. You see, when something is incredibly difficult and expensive to produce, its value transcends mere aesthetics and becomes deeply embedded in the social fabric. Tyrian Purple became the ultimate power accessory, the ancient equivalent of a diamond-encrusted supercar, but, wearable, from its earliest widespread use. It's probably around the 15th century BCE, with the Minoans, and then perfected by the Phoenicians. Purple was quickly adopted by ruling elites. Why? Because its rarity and cost naturally restricted its ownership to the very few. If only kings, emperors, and high priests could afford it, then wearing purple made you look like a king, emperor, or high priest. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy of exclusivity. This mainstream historical fact is well documented. Purple quickly became a color of royalty and divinity. Consider the Roman Empire, where purple reached its zenith of symbolic power. Sumptuary laws were enacted, specifically restricting who could wear purple and how much of it they could display. At various times, only the emperor himself was permitted to wear a toga dyed entirely in imperial purple. Senators might be allowed a purple stripe on their togas, the toga praetexta, while triumphant generals could wear a purple cloak toga picta during their victory parades. If you were caught rocking a full purple outfit without the proper credentials, you weren't just committing a fashion faux pas. You were challenging the very structure of the state. It was a serious offense, probably resulting in more than just a stern talking to from the fashion police. Imagine being thrown in jail for wearing the wrong color. But officer, it's just a lovely shade of lavender. Silence. That's an imperial shade, you scoundrel. This restrictive use cemented purple's association with power. It wasn't merely a color, it was a badge of office, a visual manifestation of political and religious authority. In religious contexts, particularly within Judaism and later Christianity, purple was also widely used for priestly vestments and temple decorations, symbolizing holiness, sacrifice, and divine majesty. The curtain of the tabernacle in the Old Testament, for example, was specified to include blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, indicating their sacred significance. This intertwining of secular and sacred power only amplified purple's prestige. The sheer impracticality of producing Tyrian purple also added to its allure. It wasn't just expensive in terms of raw materials. It was expensive in terms of labor, time, and the pungent process involved. This meant that any garment dyed with true Tyrian purple represented an enormous investment. It was a conspicuous display of wealth, demonstrating not just that you had money, but that you had so much money you could afford to waste it on something as frivolous as a snail-derived color. In an era before banking and stock markets, wealth was often displayed through tangible, luxurious goods, and purple fabric was perhaps the most potent of these. A wardrobe full of purple was essentially an ancient, diversified portfolio. A quirky tidbit related to this, because the dye was so incredibly expensive, and because only certain high-ranking individuals were allowed to wear full purple, there was a market for fake purple. Lesser dyes, often derived from plants like madder root or woad, could be mixed to approximate a purple hue, but they lacked the vibrancy, permanence, and unique chemical signature of genuine Tyrian purple. These imitations were significantly cheaper, but wouldn't fool a discerning eye, especially over time as they faded. It was like buying a knockoff designer bag today. Everyone knows it's not the real deal. But sometimes you just gotta have that look on a budget. This created a subtle hierarchy within the purple wearers, a nuanced distinction understood by the elite. Historians still debate the extent to which these fake purples were widespread, so whether specific blends were developed to pass for the real thing in different contexts. The symbolism of purple endured for centuries. The decline of the Phoenicians. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, continued to use purple as a primary imperial color. To be born in the purple porphyrogenitos meant to be born in a specific purple-clad chamber of the imperial palace, signifying legitimate birth and direct succession to the throne. This phrase highlighted the profound and lasting connection between the color and ultimate authority. Even as the specific source of the dye shifted over time with other less laborious purple dyes emerging, the idea of purple as the color of royalty persisted. This enduring symbolism speaks to the power of a deeply ingrained cultural association. The Phoenicians didn't just sell a dye. They sold an identity, a symbol that resonated across disparate cultures and centuries. From the pharaohs of Egypt, who occasionally used it, or similar dyes to the emperors of Rome and Byzantium, the demand for this particular hue was unyielding. It was more than fashion. It was a political statement, a religious affirmation, and the ultimate display of untouchable status. And it all came from thousands of little sea snails, painstakingly harvested and putrefied. Makes you wonder what? Everyday items today might hold similar hidden power in the future, doesn't it? Perhaps the pigment used in your phone screen? Probably not. But you get the idea. Trade routes and riches having understood the immense prestige and symbolism embedded in Tyrian purple. Let's now trace how this coveted color fueled the trade routes and riches of the Phoenician Empire. The production of purple dye wasn't just an isolated industry. It was a cornerstone of their economic dominance and a key driver of their expansive maritime trade network across the Mediterranean. These guys weren't just sailing around. They were building a global supply chain, ancient style. The Phoenicians, often called the Purple People by the Greeks, weren't just skilled dyers. They were unparalleled seafarers and merchants. Their homeland, a narrow strip of land along the eastern Mediterranean, modern-day Lebanon, coastal Syria, and northern Israel, had limited agricultural resources but abundant cedar forests perfect for shipbuilding and, crucially, access to those murex snails. This unique combination of natural resources and entrepreneurial spirit set the stage for their commercial empire. They understood that specialization and trade were their tickets to prosperity. Their ships, crafted from the famed cedars of Lebanon, were renowned for their sturdiness and speed. These weren't just simple fishing vessels. They were sophisticated merchant ships, capable of long-distance voyages. They would ply the trade routes carrying not just finished purple textiles, but also raw materials like timber, metals from distant mines, glass, and other luxury goods. In exchange, they brought back exotic goods from far-flung lands, like tin from distant Britain, essential for bronze making, silver from Spain, and ivory and gold from Africa. Tyrian Purple was their flagship product, the premium item that opened doors and established their reputation. It was their ancient brand, recognized and desired by elites everywhere. The demand for purple was global, reaching from Mesopotamia to Egypt, Greece, and eventually the burgeoning Roman Republic. This widespread demand meant the Phoenicians could command incredibly high prices for their purple goods. A single bolt of richly dyed fabric could be worth a king's ransom, quite literally. This allowed them to amass enormous wealth, which in turn funded further expansion, larger fleets, and the establishment of numerous trading posts and colonies across the Mediterranean basin. These colonies, like Carthage in North Africa, Cadiz, in Spain, and various outposts in Sicily and Sardinia, weren't just military strongholds, they were commercial hubs. They served as vital way stations for their ships, sources of raw materials including more murex snails from new grounds, markets for their finished goods. It was like setting up ancient distribution centers and regional offices. The economic model was brilliantly effective. Produce a highly valuable, exclusive luxury good, control its production secrets, and dominate the means of its distribution. This enabled them to maintain a near monopoly on high-quality purple dye for centuries. While other cultures undoubtedly tried to replicate the process, the Phoenicians' head start. Their abundant murex resources and their refined industrial techniques gave them an insurmountable advantage. They were the original disruptors, creating a market and then dominating it completely. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Phoenician trade empire was built on a diverse range of goods. But purple dye was undoubtedly its most famous and lucrative export. A quirky tidbit about their trade practices. The Phoenicians were known for being incredibly shrewd, sometimes even ruthless traders. They were not above engaging in a bit of industrial espionage or maintaining strict control. Over information about their production methods and trade routes, their reputation among some ancient Greeks was one of cunning and opportunism, sometimes seen as more focused on profit than ethics. But hey, that's business, right? You don't build a vast trading empire by being overly sentimental. Do? Historians still debate the extent of their ruthlessness. Were they truly exploitative? Or simply highly effective capitalists in a nascent global economy? The wealth generated by the purple dye trade wasn't just used for personal enrichment. It fueled the development of their impressive city-states. Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became centers of art, architecture, and learning, adorned with grand temples and palaces. The revenue from purple dye helped fund their powerful navies, which in turn protected their merchant fleets and ensured the security of their trade routes. It was a virtuous cycle of production, trade, wealth, generation, and power. Projection. The tiny murex snail, in essence, became a strategic asset, almost like an ancient oil well. The Phoenicians also pioneered innovations in accounting and record-keeping to manage their complex trade operations. While not directly related to purple dye production, the immense volume of transactions and goods necessitated efficient systems. It's believed they played a crucial role in developing and popularizing the alphabetic scripta revolutionary system that simplified writing compared to cuneiform or hieroglyphs, making record-keeping faster and more accessible for merchants. Across diverse languages, this seemingly academic development was fundamentally driven by the practical needs of their sprawling commercial empire, making it easier to track inventories, contracts, and of course, the incredibly valuable shipments of purple. So, every time you type a text message, you're indirectly benefiting from the Phoenicians' need to manage their purple dye spreadsheets. Ultimately, the purple dye trade exemplifies how a single, highly specialized commodity can reshape entire civilizations, driving innovation, exploration, and the accumulation of vast wealth. The Phoenicians' mastery of this particular craft, combined with their extraordinary seafaring and commercial talents, allowed them to build an enduring legacy that influenced art, politics, and the very foundations of trade in the ancient world. They turned a biological curiosity into a golden goose, leaving a legacy far richer and more colorful than simple history books might suggest. Beyond the tunic, you've seen how Tyrian Purple draped emperors and priests, but its influence wasn't confined to just tunics and togas. This incredibly versatile and valuable dye found its way into a surprising array of applications, extending beyond the tunic and permeating various aspects of ancient life and luxury. It wasn't just fashion. It was a status symbol that could be applied to anything that needed to scream expensive and important. One of the most significant non-garment uses was in religious contexts. We've touched upon priestly vestments, but purple was also used extensively for temple decorations, ceremonial cloths, and even the adornment of cult statues. The richness and permanence of the color made it ideal for objects intended to evoke reverence and a sense of the divine. Imagine the awe inspired by a temple interior where the holiest objects were draped in this shimmering deep purple. Curtain of the tabernacle in the Old Testament, for example, was specified to include blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, often interpreted as genuine murex dye. This indicates that its use in religious settings predates even the height of the Roman Empire and held deep spiritual significance. It was a color fit for the gods, or at least for communicating with them, beyond religious artifacts. Purple also featured in royal and imperial residences. Imagine tapestries adorning palace walls, dyed with the magnificent hue, adding an unparalleled opulence to banqueting halls and audience chambers. Imperial banners and standards would also have been dyed purple, serving as powerful visual symbols. On battlefields and in parades, When you see modern depictions of Roman emperors, they're almost always shown in purple, and that's not just artistic license. It's historically accurate because the color itself conveyed their ultimate authority. These weren't just functional items, they were propaganda, visually asserting power and prestige to anyone who laid eyes on them. Then there was the application to manuscripts and writing. In later antiquity and the early medieval period, incredibly rare and precious manuscripts, particularly those commissioned by emperors or high ecclesiastical figures, were sometimes written on parchment dyed purple. These purple codices, or purple gospels, were extraordinary luxury items. The text itself might be written in gold or silver ink, shimmering against the deep purple background, making the manuscript truly glow. These weren't for everyday reading. They were liturgical, books or imperial records, designed to be admired and revered. The production of such a manuscript would have been an astronomical undertaking. Combining the immense cost of the purple parchment with the skill of master scribes and illuminators, it's a testament to purple's enduring value that it continued to be used for such exclusive purposes even after the direct Phoenician monopoly waned. A quirky tidbit: the famous Codex Purpureos Rosinensis, a 6th century Greek illuminated manuscript of the Gospels, is one of the most stunning surviving examples of this practice, showcasing the incredible artistry and expense involved. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, given the extreme cost, but the surviving examples speak volumes about its prestige. Interestingly, purple also found its way into art and decoration in more subtle ways. Frescoes and mosaics, particularly those depicting emperors or divine figures, might incorporate purple pigments. While extracting purple pigment from the dye for paint was likely even more difficult than dyeing fabric, given its insolubility. After oxidation, ancient artists found ways. Expense meant it was used sparingly, perhaps for the robes of a central figure, or for a specific symbolic element. It was a way to impart a sense of majesty and importance, even within a fixed artwork. The dye was also sometimes used for funerary purposes, particularly for high-status burials. Wrapping a deceased emperor or dignitary in purple-dyed shrouds was a final, emphatic statement of their enduring status, even in death. It was a way of ensuring that their earthly prestige carried over into the afterlife, a sort of eternal status symbol. Even in the more mundane realm, purple played a role in imperial symbolism through items like seals and official documents. While the documents themselves might not be purple, the seals that authenticated them, or the ribbons used to tie them, could be. It was a consistent visual marker of imperial authority, ensuring that even small details conveyed the pervasive power of the state. The spread of Tyrian purple beyond just textiles highlights its almost mythical status in the ancient world. It wasn't just a commodity, it was a concept, a color imbued with layers of meaning and power. Its journey from a humble snail gland to adorning sacred texts, royal chambers, imperial banners, speaks to the extraordinary human desire for luxury, exclusivity, and the visible manifestation of authority. The Phoenicians, through their mastery of this unique chemical process, provided the ancient world with the ultimate symbol of distinction, proving that even a tiny sea creature could have a colossal impact on civilization. What else they could have done with all those snails if they hadn't been so obsessed with purple? Maybe snail-flavored ancient jerky? Probably not. Decline of an empire, good things, even empires built on snails, must come to an end. The glorious reign of Tyrian Purple and the Phoenician dominance over its production didn't last forever. We now turn to the decline of an empire, tracing the factors that gradually led to the fall of Phoenician commercial power and, with it, the dwindling production of their most famous export. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a long, slow fade, like a magnificent purple cloth, gradually losing its vibrancy after centuries of exposure to the elements. The primary factor in the decline of Phoenician independence and their commercial empire was the rise of larger, more aggressive imperial powers. For centuries, the Phoenician city-states, though wealthy and influential, were geographically nestled between powerful empires like Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, and later Hellenistic kingdoms in Rome. These larger empires constantly vied for control of the Levant, seeing it as a crucial strategic and commercial crossroads. The Phoenicians often found themselves caught in the middle, forced to pay tribute or become vassals, which severely curtailed their autonomy and economic freedom. It's hard to run a global trade network when a giant army is constantly marching through your backyard demanding taxes. The Assyrians and Babylonians, for example, exerted significant pressure on Phoenician cities from the 9th to the 6th centuries. BCE, Tyre, despite its island fortifications, was besieged multiple times, notably by Nebuchadnezzar II for a grueling 13 years. While Tyre often resisted fiercely and sometimes negotiated favorable terms, these conflicts undoubtedly disrupted trade, damaged infrastructure, and drained resources. Imagine trying to collect snails and dye cloth during a 13-year siege. Production quotas probably took a nosedive. Then came the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, who absorbed the Phoenician city-states into his vast dominion in the 6th century BCE. While Persian rule was often more benign, the Phoenician navy became an integral part of the Persian fleet. Their independence was gone. Their maritime expertise was now at the service of a larger power, rather than solely for their own commercial expansion. They were still important, but no longer the masters of their own destiny. The most decisive blow came with the conquests of Alexander the Great in the late 4th century BCE. Alexander's siege of Tyre in 332 BCE is legendary for its brutality and ingenuity. To capture the island city, Alexander famously built a massive causeway mole, connecting it to the mainland, a feat of engineering that took 7 months. When Tyre finally fell after ferocious resistance, Alexander punished its inhabitants mercilessly, executing thousands and selling tens of thousands into slavery. This catastrophic event effectively ended Tyre's dominance as a major Phoenician power and a center of the purple dye industry. While the city eventually recovered, it never regained its former glory and commercial supremacy. It was effectively game over for the purple dye industrial complex as they knew it. Beyond external pressures, other factors contributed. As new empires rose, they sometimes developed their own trade networks or sought out alternative sources. For luxury goods, gradually eroding the Phoenician monopoly. For instance, the Greeks and later the Romans developed their own maritime capabilities, reducing their reliance on Phoenician shipping. The discovery or refinement of alternative, albeit inferior, purple dyes also chipped away at the demand for the incredibly expensive Tyrian Purple. While none could quite replicate its specific hue or permanence, cheaper imitations likely met the needs of a broader, less elite market. It's like the advent of synthetic dyes in modern times. What was once exclusive becomes more accessible, and the original high-end product faces competition. Historians still argue about the exact point at which cheaper alternatives began to significantly impact the Tyrian Purple market. The environmental impact of centuries of intense snail harvesting also played a role, while the Phoenicians were adept at resource management. The sheer scale of the industry undoubtedly put immense pressure on local murex snail populations. While they did expand their hunting grounds, maintaining such a demanding resource base over millennia would have been challenging. A quirky tidbit: some archaeologists and marine biologists hypothesized that overharvesting led to local extinctions or severe depletion of murex beds in the most accessible areas, forcing the industry to constantly seek new, more distant sources, further increasing costs and logistical challenges. It was the ancient world's version of resource depletion. By the time the Roman Empire fully consolidated its control over the eastern Mediterranean, the Phoenician cities were firmly under Roman provincial administration. While purple dye production continued, particularly in Tyre, it was no longer an independent Phoenician enterprise driving their own vast trade empire. Instead, it became a Roman industry, still highly valued, but centrally controlled and taxed. The glorious, independent era of the Purple people had ended. The fall wasn't just about military defeats. It was about the slow erosion of their commercial autonomy and their unique cultural identity as they were absorbed into larger political entities. The little snail that built an empire, it ultimately couldn't withstand the might of legions echoes in history even. After the political and commercial Decline of the Phoenician Empire, the allure of purple, particularly the deep, rich hue of Tyrian purple, didn't vanish. Instead, its symbolism and prestige continued to resonate, leaving echoes in history that stretch right up to the modern day. The color itself had become too powerful, too deeply ingrained in the human psyche as a sign of royalty and divine authority, to simply fade away. Following the Roman conquest, production of Tyrian purple continued, albeit under Roman control. The dye remained the exclusive preserve of the Roman emperors and their immediate families, further cementing its association with ultimate power. As the Western Roman Empire declined, the tradition of imperial purple was carried on by the Byzantine Empire in the East for over 1,000 years, from Constantinople. The Byzantine emperors maintained the strict sumptuary laws surrounding purple. To be born in the purple porphyrogenitos meant to be born in the porphora, a special chamber within the imperial palace specifically decorated with purple porphyry stone and textiles. This ensured a direct link to legitimate imperial succession. Highlighting the enduring power of the color as a symbol of divine right to rule was literally being born into privilege with a purple birth certificate. If you will, the decline of the Byzantine Empire and the eventual fall of Constantinople in 1453 didn't end purple's reign, but it did mark a turning point. The traditional methods of producing Tyrian purple, highly labor-intensive and secretive, largely died out or became severely diminished after the Byzantine era. The exact knowledge of the complex dyeing process, passed down through generations, was lost to common practice. This meant that genuine Tyrian purple became incredibly rare, almost mythical, making any surviving fragments or uses even more precious. Despite the loss of the authentic snail-derived dye, the idea of purple as a royal color persisted in Europe. European monarchs yearning for the prestige associated with Roman and Byzantine emperors adopted various shades of purple for their coronation robes and official regalia. However, without the murex snails, these purples were often achieved through other, less permanent and less vibrant means. They might have used mixes of reds from madder or cochineal and blues from woad or indigo to create a purple hue. These plant-based dyes, while accessible, lacked the unique chemical stability and depth of Tyrian purple, a quirky tidbit, the cochineal insect. Imported from the Americas after the Age of Discovery, offered a brilliant crimson red that could be mixed with indigo to create a much richer purple than had previously been possible with European plant dyes, giving a new lease of life to the color of royalty. It was a bit like a medieval upgrade to your color palette. Even in the Catholic Church, purple maintained its significance. Cardinals wear distinct purple, specifically scarlet, but historically, a deep red purple as a sign of their rank, and bishops were a lighter shade. This tradition draws directly from the ancient association of purple with authority and divinity, a continuous thread from ancient Rome and Byzantium. So when you see a cardinal, you're looking at an echo of snail dye, in spirit if not in actual pigment. Historians still debate the extent to which the specific shade of purple in ecclesiastical vestments consciously references the ancient Tyrian dye, or if it simply reflects a broader adoption of purple as a symbol of authority. The 19th century brought a revolution in color with the advent of synthetic dyes. In 1856, William Henry Perkin accidentally discovered mauveine, the first synthetic organic dye, while trying to synthesize quinine. This synthetic purple dye was relatively inexpensive and easy to produce, making purple accessible to the masses for the very first time. Suddenly, everyone could wear purple. This marked a dramatic shift. What was once the most exclusive color became commonplace. It democratized color in a way that the ancient Phoenicians could never have imagined, fundamentally changing fashion and design. This is a mainstream historical fact. Perkin's discovery revolutionized the dye industry. Today, purple remains a popular color, still carrying undertones of royalty, luxury, and even mystery. Think of phrases like purple prose or purple patch. They evoke richness, extravagance, and sometimes excess. It's the color of luxury brands, academic regalia, and even political movements like the suffragette movement, where purple symbolized dignity. Its enduring appeal lies in this deep historical memory, a subconscious link to the power and prestige it once embodied. So, While the ancient Phoenician dye works are now mostly archaeological ruins and mounds of broken shells, the legacy of their ingenuity lives on. The simple act of crushing a snail and extracting its fluid set in motion a chain of events that influenced art, politics, religion, and trade for thousands of years. It's a powerful reminder of how a seemingly small discovery, when mastered and strategically exploited, can leave an indelible mark on the tapestry of human history. The echoes of that ancient purple still reverberate, reminding us that sometimes the most profound impacts come from the most unexpected places. Modern dyeing debates. The story of Tyrian Purple isn't confined to ancient history. It continues to intrigue chemists, historians, and artists even today. This enduring fascination has led to numerous modern dyeing debates and attempts to recreate the ancient process, exploring whether we can truly replicate that mythical hue, and if so, how closely it matches what the Phoenicians achieved. It's a bit like trying to perfectly recreate a forgotten ancient recipe, but for a color. One of the central debates revolves around the exact chemical composition of ancient Tyrian Purple. While we know the primary active compound is 66, dibromoindigo specifically. A brominated indigo, the ancient process likely involved a mixture of several indigoid compounds. Derived from different murex species and influenced by the subtle variations in their chemical reactions during fermentation and oxidation, modern analytical techniques like high-performance liquid chromatography, HPLC, and mass spectrometry have been used to analyze tiny surviving fragments of ancient purple textiles and residues from archaeological sites. These analyses confirm the presence of dibromoindigo, but also reveal other related compounds, suggesting a complex multi-component dye rather than a single pure pigment. Historians still argue about the precise ratios and whether these variations were intentional or simply a result of the raw materials and imprecise ancient methods. Recreating the dye today presents significant challenges. First, obtaining the murex snails in the quantities needed for any substantial dyeing is problematic due to conservation concerns. Modern researchers often work with very small quantities of snails, or even try to synthesize the precursor compounds in a laboratory setting rather than engaging in mass mollusk slaughter. A quirky tidbit: some contemporary efforts involve breeding murex snails in controlled environments to extract the dye. But this is incredibly costly and yields very little pigment, making it commercially unviable but scientifically fascinating. Fermentation process is another area of intense debate and experimentation. Modern chemists understand the general principles of reduction and oxidation, but replicating the specific microbial environment and enzymatic reactions that occurred in ancient vats is tricky. The presence of specific bacteria, ambient temperatures, water quality, and precise timing all played a role. Some researchers have attempted to replicate the ancient putrid conditions, often to the dismay of their lab colleagues, to see if it yields a more authentic color. It's a scientific endeavor that literally stinks. Others try to synthesize the key compounds more cleanly. The actual hue is also a subject of continuous discussion. Ancient descriptions often describe Tyrian purple as ranging from a deep clotted blood red to a dark, almost black purple. Surviving textile fragments, however, have often faded over millennia. When modern chemists successfully extract and synthesize the dibromoindigo, it tends to be a very pure, intense, violet-blue purple. This has led to questions. Did the Phoenicians truly achieve that deep reddish purple? Or is it an effect of other compounds in their traditional process, or perhaps the way specific fibers like wool, which might interact differently with the dye-reflected light? The consensus now is that the deep reddish purple, the most prized shade, was likely achieved by combining the extract of Bolenus brandaris, which yields a more reddish hue, with that of Hexaplex trunculus, which produces a bluer hue. Very specific temperature controls during the dyeing process. The environmental impact is also part of the modern debate. While scientists are fascinated by the chemistry, they also acknowledge the unsustainable nature of the ancient production method. The thought of killing millions of snails for a single batch of dye raises ethical and ecological questions in today's world. This means modern recreation efforts are primarily academic or artistic rather than commercial, driven by a desire to understand history and chemistry rather than to re-establish a luxury market for snail-derived purple. This concern about sustainability is a relatively modern concept that the Phoenicians, focused on profit and empire, likely didn't consider in the same way. So, while modern chemistry can synthesize the core molecule of Tyrian purple, truly replicating the full spectrum of shades, the exact properties, and the precise conditions of the ancient Phoenician process, remains a complex, ongoing challenge. It's a constant reminder that ancient technologies, despite their apparent simplicity, often involved layers of intuitive understanding, practical knowledge, and environmental factors that are difficult to isolate and reproduce in a modern laboratory. It keeps historians and chemists busy arguing over the true color of an ancient empire. Sustainability struggles as we consider modern attempts to recreate Tyrian purple. It's impossible to ignore a crucial, less glamorous aspect of its history: the sustainability struggles inherent in its production. The Phoenician purple industry, while a marvel of ancient enterprise, came at a significant environmental cost, highlighting the tension between luxury, resource exploitation, and ecological balance. Tension that still resonates deeply today. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of the operation. To produce even a small amount of finished dye, perhaps enough for 1 or 2 imperial robes, required tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of murex snails. Now multiply that by centuries of continuous production across numerous dye works along the Phoenician coast and beyond. The numbers quickly become astronomical. This was not a sustainable fishery by modern standards. It was a systematic depletion of natural marine populations. Archaeologists have discovered massive middens or refuse piles of crushed murex shells. At ancient dye sites that are sometimes dozens of feet deep and cover acres of land, these are not just archaeological curiosities. They're stark evidence of the immense ecological footprint left by this ancient luxury industry. It's like finding a mountain of empty oyster shells, but multiplied by 100, and all for color. The primary impact was, of course, the over-harvesting of murex snails. While murex snails are relatively common in the Mediterranean, consistent, intensive harvesting pressure year after year, especially during their breeding seasons when glands were richest, would undoubtedly have led to significant local population declines. As easily accessible coastal populations dwindled, the Phoenicians would have been forced to expand their harvesting grounds, sending ships and divers further afield, increasing the logistical complexity and cost of obtaining their raw material. This forced expansion is a clear indicator of resource scarcity. Historians still debate the exact impact of this over-harvesting. Did it lead to local extinctions, or simply severe depletions that recovered slowly? The archaeological evidence suggests localized ecological pressure was intense. Beyond the snails themselves, the dye production process had other environmental consequences. The fermentation vats, as we've discussed, produced a truly noxious and putrid effluent. This liquid, laden with organic waste, ammonia, and other chemical byproducts, would have been regularly discharged into the adjacent coastal waters. While the ancient world lacked the industrial-scale pollution of today, these concentrated discharges from numerous dye works would have led to significant localized marine pollution. Imagine the impact on nearby marine life, the oxygen depletion in the water, and the overall degradation of the immediate coastal environment. Fish and other shellfish populations might have suffered, further impacting local ecosystems and food sources for nearby communities. The smell alone would have been a strong environmental indicator of something unpleasant happening. Just follow your nose to the ancient industrial park. The sheer number of shells left behind also had an impact. While seemingly inert, these enormous piles of shells could alter coastal landscapes, changing drainage patterns or contributing to erosion. They were essentially ancient landfills, albeit once composed of organic, if very slow to decompose material. A quirky tidbit: some modern researchers speculate that these shell mounds actually altered local microclimates, or even provided unique habitats for certain species of plants and insects, creating unforeseen ecological niches. Though this is a very fringe theory compared to the clear evidence of mollusk depletion, the lessons from the Phoenician purple industry's sustainability struggles are eerily relevant today. We continue to see industries, particularly those producing luxury goods, grappling with the environmental costs of their production methods. From rare earth minerals for electronics to exotic materials for fashion, the pursuit of exclusivity and wealth often places immense pressure on finite natural resources and fragile ecosystems. The story of Tyrian Purple serves as a powerful historical precedent, reminding us that the demand for beauty and status can drive exploitation on an alarming scale. While the Phoenicians weren't operating with a concept of environmental impact, assessments, or sustainable development, their industry demonstrates that even in antiquity, the limits of natural resources could be reached. Their eventual decline, partly due to the inability to maintain their resource base and adapt to new geopolitical realities, underscores the long-term consequences of unsustainable practices. So the next time you admire a beautiful, vibrant color, take a moment to ponder its origins and the often hidden costs that went into its creation. Whether an ancient Tyre or a modern factory, it's a good reminder that every luxury has a footprint, hidden archaeological clues beyond the historical accounts and the enduring symbolism. The physical remnants of the Phoenician purple industry offer incredible insights into their methods and scale. These hidden archaeological clues have been painstakingly unearthed by modern scholars, providing tangible evidence of a once thriving, if malodorous, enterprise. It's like being an ancient detective, piecing together a puzzle from thousands of tiny, smelly clues. The most pervasive and unmistakable archaeological evidence are the vast shell middens. These enormous mounds of crushed murex shells are found at numerous ancient sites along the coastlines of modern-day Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, particularly around the ancient cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Sarepta. Some of these shell piles are truly immense, rising several meters high and covering significant areas. They are a direct, visceral testament to the sheer number of snails processed. Imagine trying to dig through layers of thousands upon thousands of broken shells. It's archaeological work that probably requires a strong stomach and a face mask. These middens are not just waste dumps. They contain fragments of pottery, tools, and sometimes even remnants of the vats themselves, providing context for the industrial activities. Historians still argue about the exact volume of snails represented by these middens. Precise calculations are difficult, but estimates run into the billions of individual mollusks over the centuries. Alongside the shell middens, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of the dying vats themselves. These are typically large terracotta or stone-lined basins, often found in clusters or rows, suggesting a factory-like setup. Some are large enough to immerse significant quantities of fabric, while smaller ones might have been used for initial fermentation or for specialized batches. The interior surfaces of these vats often show distinct staining, some retaining traces of the reddish-purple pigment that infused them for centuries. Analyzing these residues provides chemical evidence of the dye's composition and confirms the nature of the industry. The presence of drainage channels leading from the vats to the sea also confirms the effluent disposal methods, reinforcing the picture of a highly organized, if polluting, industrial process. The discovery of Phoenician amphorae and pottery at distant sites, particularly those containing residues or traces of organic matter, also serves as an indirect clue. While many amphorae carried wine or olive oil, specialized containers might have been used for transporting raw murex gland material or concentrated dye precursors to other locations, either within the Phoenician network or for trade with client states. The distinct Phoenician pottery styles found widely across the Mediterranean trade routes tell a story of their vast commercial reach, and by extension, the spread of their most valuable product. Less direct, but equally important, are the textile fragments themselves. While genuine Tyrian purple textiles are incredibly rare due to the fragility of ancient fabrics, occasional discoveries in tombs, dry caves, or sealed environments have yielded small pieces. Analyzing these fragments with modern scientific techniques, like HPLC, as mentioned, allows chemists to confirm the presence of 66-dibromoindigo and other murex-derived compounds, providing definitive proof of the use of this specific dye. A quirky tidbit: one of the most famous examples is a small piece of fabric found in the tomb of King Herod in Israel, which, upon analysis, confirmed the presence of Tyrian Purple, reaffirming its royal association even millennia later. Like finding a designer label from 2,000 years ago. Archaeological excavations have also revealed details about the layout of the dye works. They were often located close to the coast for easy access to the Snails and for effluent disposal, but often slightly removed from the main urban centers due to the pungent smell. This strategic positioning reflects a practical consideration for managing the industry's significant environmental and olfactory impact. Some sites show evidence of associated structures like workshops for preparing the fabrics or storage areas for the processed dye. This gives us a clearer picture of the entire production chain, from raw material to finished product. Finally, the very geography and geological formations of the Phoenician coast provide clues. The rocky shorelines and shallow, calm waters were ideal habitats for the murex snails, making the region a prime location for the industry to flourish. The natural abundance of the raw material was a prerequisite for the industry's massive scale, and recognizing these ecological factors helps complete the archaeological picture. These archaeological clues are crucial because they move beyond literary descriptions and myths, giving us concrete scientific evidence of how the Phoenicians operated. They paint a vivid picture of an ancient industrial powerhouse, built on the exploitation of a humble sea creature, and leaving an indelible, purple-stained mark on the archaeological record. It truly brings the history of this remarkable color to life, allowing us to almost step back in time and witness the ancient world's most luxurious stench, lessons from the past. Having sifted through the archaeological clues and examined the grand scale of the purple industry, it's worth pausing to reflect on the broader lessons from the past that the Phoenician story offers us. It's particularly regarding innovation, trade, and the unexpected drivers of historical change. This isn't just about ancient snails. It's about enduring human ingenuity and the complex interplay of economy and environment. One of the foremost lessons is the power of specialization and strategic resource exploitation. The Phoenicians understood that, by focusing on what they did best at seafaring, trade, and a unique production of purple dye, they could carve out an extraordinary niche for themselves in the ancient world. They leveraged a specific natural resource, murex snails, and combined it with their innovative technical skills to create a product of immense value. This focus allowed them to thrive despite being a relatively small civilization caught between much larger empires. It's a classic example of do one thing and do it exceptionally well, and they did it for centuries. This highlights how innovation, even in what seems like a niche area, can become a foundational pillar of an entire economy. Secondly, the Phoenician narrative underscores the crucial role of trade and connectivity in shaping civilizations. Vast maritime network wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. The demand for Tyrian Purple acted as a powerful engine for this network, driving their exploration, their establishment of colonies, and their interactions with diverse peoples across the Mediterranean. They effectively created an early form of globalization, connecting disparate economies and cultures through the arteries of their trade routes. The more valuable the goods, the further and more frequently the ships would sail, fostering an interconnectedness that benefited everyone, even if unevenly. Another key lesson is the often overlooked environmental impact of ancient industries. We tend to think of pollution and resource depletion as modern problems, but the Phoenician dye works remind us that large-scale industrial activities, even with ancient technologies, could have significant localized ecological consequences. The massive shell middens serve as a stark archaeological record of intensive overharvesting, a prime example of how human demand can push natural systems to their limits. This forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the pristine nature of the ancient world and recognized that resource management, even if rudimentary, was likely a recurring challenge. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars theorize that the decline of certain local Murex populations forced Phoenician dyers to travel further, inadvertently leading to the discovery of new trade routes or new sources of other valuable goods. Depletion might have actually spurred further exploration. The story also speaks to the enduring human desire for luxury and status. Tyrian Purple wasn't a necessity. It was a pure luxury item, a symbol of power and wealth. The lengths to which societies went to produce and control this color. From the arduous snail harvesting to the complex chemical processing and the strict sumptuary laws, reveal a deep-seated human. It's a need for visible markers of distinction. This need has driven innovation in trade throughout history, from ancient purple to modern haute couture. It reminds us that human desires, even for seemingly superficial things like color, can have profound economic and social consequences. Historians still argue whether the demand for purple created the Phoenician trade network, or if their existing trade network allowed them to capitalize on the dye. It's a classic chicken or egg scenario in economic history. Finally, the Phoenician story teaches us about resilience and adaptability. Despite facing numerous external threats from larger empires and eventually losing their independence, the Phoenicians and their legacy persisted for centuries. Even after the fall of Tyre, the purple dye tradition continued under Roman and Byzantine rule. Their innovations in shipbuilding, trade, and even the alphabet left an indelible mark on subsequent civilizations. They weren't just conquered. Their ideas and practices were absorbed and adapted, influencing the very fabric of the ancient and medieval worlds. So, when you look back at the Phoenicians and their remarkable purple dye, you're not just observing a historical curiosity. You're witnessing a masterclass in ancient entrepreneurship, stark reminder of environmental limits, and a testament to the enduring human fascination with beauty, power, and prestige. It's a narrative that intertwines biology, chemistry, economics, and geopolitics, all stemming from a humble sea snail. Who knew mollusks could be so profound? Royal slumber as the echoes of the ancient Phoenician dye works begin to fade, and the pervasive, pungent aroma of 1,000 years of industry gently dissipates. We arrive at the culmination of our journey, concluding with the lasting and profound impact of the color purple. It's a color that has endured far beyond its original source, a royal slumber that continues to infuse our language, our symbols, and our subconscious understanding of power, luxury, and even spirituality. What began as the humble secretion of a tiny sea snail became a universal language of prestige, hue so deeply embedded in human culture that its significance transcends its biological origins. The true, enduring legacy of the Phoenicians isn't just the physical remnants of their dye vats or the faint chemical traces on ancient textiles. It's the deep, almost primal association of purple with royalty, wealth, and spiritual authority that persists even today, thousands of years after the last Murex snail was crushed for its precious gland. See this everywhere. In the ceremonial robes of monarchs during coronations, in the very language we use, royal purple, purple prose, purple heart for Valar, in the immense symbolic weight it carries in countless cultures and institutions across the globe. What started as a stinky, laborious chemical reaction in a sun-baked vat transformed into an abstract concept, a universal signifier of elite status and divine connection. Consider for a moment how purple is still meticulously chosen and displayed, in various contexts, for the majestic robes of kings and queens, signifying their lineage and sovereign power, for the esteemed academic regalia of scholars denoting wisdom and intellectual achievement, for the solemn, dignified vestments of high church officials, emphasizing their spiritual authority and connection to the divine. In each instance, it's a deliberate choice, whether consciously or subconsciously, to tap into millennia of inherited meaning. Even in modern branding and design, purple often connotes luxury, creativity, sophistication, and even a touch of mystery or magic. It's the color of exclusive brands, sophisticated art installations, and often quiet yet profound ambition. This consistent use, echoing across time and diverse cultures, is irrefutable proof that some symbols are so potent, so deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness, that they simply refuse to go out of style or lose their evocative power. The Phoenicians, through their unparalleled mastery of this challenging and unique production process, effectively cast a permanent spell on the concept of color itself. They took a naturally occurring phenomenon, the chemical transformation of a mollusk secretion, amplified its significance, transforming it from a mere pigment into a powerful cultural artifact. They were, in essence, the ancient world's first brand strategists, understanding that true luxury wasn't just about gold and jewels, but also about rarity, painstaking effort, and an exclusive connection to something unique and difficult to obtain. This profound understanding of luxury, built on scarcity and highly specialized knowledge, is a concept that echoes throughout economic history. From the ancient Silk Road to today's high-end fashion houses, a quirky tidbit to leave you with. Pondering the absolute extent of their commercial ambition, some fringe archaeological and biological theories suggest that the Phoenicians themselves, or other ancient mariners working under their influence, may have even attempted to transplant and cultivate murex snails in new coastal locations to establish new dye works, closer to their burgeoning markets or to ensure a more reliable supply of raw material. While definitive proof of successful industrial-scale translocations for dye production purposes remains scarce and debated among scholars, the mere possibility highlights their profound understanding of their resource and their unparalleled commitment to expanding and sustaining their lucrative trade. Speaks volumes about their innovative spirit and their willingness to push the boundaries of ancient aquaculture and resource management. Historians still debate the extent to which this theoretical ancient bioengineering might have been attempted or successful, adding another layer of intriguing mystery to their already remarkable story. Ultimately, the story of Tyrian Purple is far more than a simple account of how a dye was made. It is a vivid, tangible reminder of how interconnected our world has always been, even in antiquity. A tiny mollusk thriving in the shallow waters of the Mediterranean could fuel empires, inspire art, shape politics, and leave an indelible mark on the course of human history. It's a narrative that intricately intertwines biology, chemistry, economics, geopolitics, and cultural symbolism, all stemming from a humble, unassuming sea snail. Who knew mollusks could be so profoundly impactful? Now, as the ancient tides of history gently recede, carrying away the faint, lingering memory of those long-gone dye works and their laborious, pungent processes, allow yourself to drift. The tumultuous historical journey, filled with industry, ambition, and the pursuit of ultimate luxury, is now complete. The vibrant legacy of purple, however, remains a soft, rich hue woven intricately into the very fabric of time, a calming presence in the quiet moments before sleep. So, close your eyes, let the vivid images of ancient ships sailing across sapphire seas, of emperors robed in shimmering violet, and of tireless workers toiling in sun-drenched vats gently fade into the background. Let the sounds of history become a distant hum, allowing your mind to settle into a deep, peaceful rest. The vast, colorful tapestry of human endeavor awaits your exploration tomorrow. But for now, sleep well, bathed in the quiet, royal slumber that only history can provide.